it's really great to have a chance to interview you and talk to you about your new book that's coming out. And I'd sure like to ask you some questions about how excited you are about releasing this book.
I'm excited about the release of the book. When you're writing and you're in the trenches and you're writing and you're editing and everything, sometimes you think, oh no, I only have 5 more hours today to work on this, and I've got to get 10 hours done, right? And it's taken me about 6 months already since I started compiling and writing more, compiling old blog posts and newsletters and adding to them and editing them. But the closer I get to the actual completion, which at this point is almost there, it's just thrilling beyond words.
So I want to know what the last thing you played purely for fun, where you're not trying to create a video for your website, you're not trying to teach somebody something, you just sat down at the piano to play for pure joy. And what happened when you did it?
I was playing A Night in Tunisia. A Night in Tunisia by Dizzy Gillespie. And it's a song I've known since I was about 16 years old. And the interesting thing is, with songs that you've known for a while, they're in you. They become like old friends after a while. That's why I encourage people even beginning jazz pianists, to learn a lot of tunes right away. Learn 5, 10, 15 tunes, even if it's just the melody and the root notes or something, because in 5 or 10 years, you want to have that relationship with the pieces. So they're like old friends. So I was just sitting down, just playing, and it felt like I was 15 again, but better.
I'm curious about something. You, without naming names first, you've obviously had some very good teachers along the way, and I want to know what those teachers did to inspire you and how you bring that into your own personal teaching.
Well, yeah, I had some great teachers along the way. I think, looking back, they taught by example. As much as what they said, it was who they were. And when you study with someone who played with Charlie Parker and is still really nice and encouraging to you, and they sit down, and for instance, I remember one example, and someone just played the blues in every key perfectly, just went up jazz blues, every key without stopping, 12 keys. They didn't have to say much. The point came across that, okay, I put in my work and you're going to have to put in your work. But very encouraging at the same time. It wasn't like, I've done all this and you're not going to go anywhere. It wasn't any of that. It was more like, yeah, you can do this too. And I got that from all of them.
You have from one teacher to another, you have a very gentle, encouraging approach to teaching, whether it's private lessons or masses of thousands of people looking at your YouTube videos. I'm curious about what you think works the best when you personally reach out to somebody and try to show them something.
I think part of it is what I just said. It's that I've done this, and I started from not being able to play anything, and I put myself in situations where I was jamming with my friends, and I got better at it, and you can too. But the thing that I think nowadays, there's a little shift since I was learning in the late 70s and 80s. That's when I was starting to learn jazz, a late teenager. But now it's a little different, because I think this so-called inner game of piano improvisation was always important, but it's become even more important to emphasize it now, because it's not something that happens naturally. A healthy attitude towards learning doesn't happen naturally anymore like it used to. There's so much information out there. It's this information overload. I call it practice paralysis, where you just feel like, okay, I've got to learn two-handed voicings, and I've got to learn how to improvise in 7/8 time, and I've got to do this, and I've got to learn 1,000 tunes, and everybody else can do it but me. And so I take the extra step of helping them get over that. And okay, we're just going to focus on this thing, because I spent 3 years just playing 7th chords before I learned what a 9th chord was. You don't have to learn all of that stuff right away. And matter of fact, it's a stumbling block. So it's to give them the sense of possibility, but also the mental attitude to actually do it, the emotional attitude that, okay, we're going to let everything else go, let all that baggage slowly dissolve, and we're going to really just play. And it's called playing the piano. It's not called suffering the piano, right? It's called playing the piano. I asked a little league coach this once. My son was playing little league, and it was a game where maybe they weren't doing so well, and a lot of the batters were striking out, and I think they lost. And I asked the coach after the game. I said, what is it? He goes, well, they can all hit the ball in practice. He goes, it's the mental game of being able to do it in a game. He said they were like 13. He said they all hit it in practice. Isn't that interesting? The only difference is up here, and it's the same thing.
That comes really close to something I was going to ask you, because you keep emphasizing the word play. And, when you look at baseball players or basketball players, that's what they do. They play. They don't work at baseball. Do you think that you can take what you do as a teacher and take it to any other discipline and still be an effective teacher? For instance, could you teach other writers based on what you have in here and how you approach teaching?
I think in a way it's all separate from the particular discipline we're in. I think learning how to write, how to do math, how to be a scientist, how to be an athlete, musician, on some level it's all the same. Of course, the particulars are different, and actually the particular approach might be slightly different. Piano tends to be one of these things, or music tends to be one of these things that combines them all. Sometimes I'll say that improvising something like jazz that has a very rich harmonic vocabulary, it's sort of like, dribbling a soccer ball down the field in the middle of a game while people are trying to intercept the ball, and you're doing physics equations in your head. It's all at the same time. So in that sense, music kind of combines a lot of these things, but everything really does to some extent. I think a lot of times I think we need to learn out of books, we need to watch videos and all that, but this personal connection with somebody, right? I mean, if you learn how to cook a new recipe by being in the kitchen with somebody who already knows how to cook it and doing it together, it's so much more fun. And also they something, just the way they stir, the way they use that wooden spoon to scrape the pan, you just get it. It's the same thing with music.
Have you discovered your writer's voice as you're putting this book together? It seems like when I'm reading it, that you're finding a way to bring what you do in personal lessons and what you do on the internet into your book now. And maybe there was a turning point where you went from writing your blog to officially deciding to write a book. And there's this thing that I've heard over and over again, talking to Frank McCourt and dozens of other Pulitzer Prize winning novelists, where they discover their writer's voice. And it's not that much different than discovering your voice on the piano. Are you discovering your voice as you're putting this book together, of bringing what you've been doing all along as a private teacher, as an internet teacher, to words on a page?
That's a really interesting question. I think the analogy with our own voice as a musician is valid and true. Keith Jarrett's a good example. He's spoken about this. A lot of people try to find their own voice as a musician by finding some voicings they like or some licks, and then you do it throughout your whole career. I'm the person who likes the 13th sharp 4 chord or something, But a lot of times that becomes static. It becomes the person who's using the same phrases that they used when they were 20, when they're 60, and maybe someone else, the person they're talking with, wants to be formal, but they still have that jargon, right? They can't let go of that. So that's part of it. But Jarrett speaks about finding something that's more natural, so that, for instance, he can play bluesy, he can play semi-classical, he can quote things that other musicians would have played almost note for note, yet it still sounds like Keith Jarrett. And that's that thing that's elusive to define with our own voice. It's the phrasing, it's the cadence. I try to write naturally the way I would speak, and then sort of put it in a way that it reads with a nice flow as well. It's interesting because a lot of this book was based on blog posts I've written as long ago as 10 years ago. And so I was actually pleasantly surprised that some of the earlier blog posts, the first ones I wrote, really hit home in terms of what I still say and what I want to communicate to people. But the way I write it comes much more naturally now. I don't have to struggle for what's that perfect word here or this. Things just come out, and then I can refine them later if I'd like. But I'm writing as if I write it longhand, but I do type with one finger. I can play the piano with 10 fingers, but I'm a two-finger typist. Figure that out. But it comes more naturally now, and I enjoy the process more in a similar way to making music than I used to.
About 10 years ago, I was working as a collaborator with some authors who are putting together the most popular introduction to mass communications textbook used in the country. And my job was to create the videos that went along with the book. 10 years ago, there was a big deal to combine media with printed word. But it's kind of interesting that a big message, a big theme in that intro to mass media book was the word media convergence. And they kept hammering that chapter after chapter, that there's no such thing as a newspaper anymore. Because if you go to the New York Times, they've got more video on the New York Times website than they do at the 11 o'clock news, which is, condensed to only a half hour of whatever stories they can cover. Do you find that you're now participating in that process of media convergence? You've got your own website, you've got your YouTube channel, you're now writing a book, but the book has audio built into it. Do you find that being a modern author, releasing a book now, that the convergence of media allows you to express yourself in a different way? And you can use that phrase, media convergence, if you want to, in your response.
Right. Yeah. This idea of media convergence. They used to call it mixed media, right? I remember going to recitals when I was at the University of Connecticut, and most of us were doing piano or music recitals, and then someone would say it's a mixed media recital, and they'd have a video in the background or a film strip or whatever, or slides.
John Cage, that kind of stuff.
Right, right. The way I look at it, because I tend not to think of the technology foremost. I tend to think of, okay, this is what I want to do. This is the environment I want to create. How can I use the technology for that? I guess it's the same thing, but coming from a different angle. So what I'm trying to do is recreate the experience I had learning music when I was a teenager, and just jamming and going over to my friend's house, bringing my 126-pound Fender Rhodes that barely fit in the back seat of my Volkswagen, and lugging it everywhere to concerts later on when I was in college, and everything, and hanging out and listening to music with my friends, and even that was kind of a way to emulate how my teachers, like Billy Taylor among them, who grew up in the late 30s, even before bebop was a teenager, and he was telling me how they learned back then, and it's creating a musical scene. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create a musical scene, whether it's by videos from my own students with my video course, or with YouTube, or in the book. There's, I think, 3 hours and 15 minutes or so of audio lessons. Audio that I recorded. There's 30 audio sprinkled throughout the book, because it's great to just read things. You can do that, but it's not a complete scene. So I wanted to complete it with my own voice and demonstrating things at the piano, and helping the reader, the listener, the student to really think in a different way. That's what it is. It's thinking in a way that thinking about music in a way that's not in this little closet. It's like this. It's broadening their approach, their understanding.
You just mentioned your YouTube audience. I'm curious how many people follow you on YouTube right now, and how you perceive this book as a gift to that group. And that's how I discovered you. I found you on YouTube because I was starting to work my way through the real book, and then I was dialing up one song at a time, trying to learn this song, trying to learn that song, and you kept coming up. And I'm sure a lot of people discovered you the same way. And you now have an actual audience of followers. That must be the coolest thing ever. And to think of this book as almost a gift to them. Is that what's kind of going on here?
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a gift to myself too, to really help me understand music more too. But I guess I think there's about 14,000 subscribers on my channel, which again, I don't intentionally try to grow an audience. I don't do clickbait. I don't make headlines that, suck people in. And, I do what I like to do. I like to work on tunes. I like to help people understand where these tunes are coming from. My journey through the real book. I've done Beatles, piano myth busting. Again, to help people understand music in a way that's it's compatible with academia, the academic approach, but it's also very real life. For instance, you can start wherever you want to start. If you want to learn how to play jazz and you like the Beatles, you don't have to start with rootless two-handed voicings a la Bill Evans. You can start with the jazzier Beatles songs and play those for a year and let those get you in a stride piano when I'm 64. And then, or the rock and roll side of things with twist and shout or something. Learn the blues scale and then maybe play a jazz blues with the blues scale. You can take any door you want. So that's the purpose of my YouTube channel, to help people get started and then to take it as far as they'd like to go. I'm not sure if I answered all of your question there, but that's how I think about it.
No, your answers are superb. One of the things that strikes me as I'm listening to you, you just explain everything so clearly when you're just talking to somebody on the video. I mean, I've been lucky enough to kind of almost be your student because you're teaching Trisha and I'm on the side listening and learning too, and watching you do your thing. It's really marvelous. I want to ask you about that. Why do you think some great players can play really well and never discover that world of teaching? I mean, there are many great players out there who just couldn't possibly share what they do with somebody else. It's rare, actually. What makes the difference between a great player like you? Obviously, you can play anything you want to, but you also have learned how to share it. What is that little magic in there?
Yeah, that's a little intangible, right? You can look at specifics like the ability to think things through, break things down. But I think a lot of it comes with understanding what it's like not to know anything and not to know how to go about learning, which was me when I was about 15, and I knew I could learn and I could eventually play the piano and play all these things. The Keith Jarrett's Cone concert was something I discovered when I was 15, and I said, that's what I want to be able to do. I want to be able to play like that, But I had no idea how to go about it. This was early 80s, 81, 80, 81, 82, long before YouTube, long before videos of any numbers. So you find a local teacher and you go from there, right? And you get something from that person, and then you find what one person can offer, and then another, and then another, and then I tend to remember these things too. I tend to remember the things I've learned from the different teachers and combine them into a bigger approach, maybe. I think my father was a good teacher. He didn't teach professionally, but I tell the story in the book that a friend of mine who was, when we were 13, was trying to learn guitar, and all the other guitar teachers said, this kid can't learn. He can't. It's just impossible. So they basically fired this 13-year-old, like 2 or 3 teachers. And then my father was, learning some chords on the guitar. He said, "Oh, just come over once a week, no charge. I'll teach you. I can teach this kid." And he did. And the kid became a professional guitarist eventually. Great rock player, So I think part of it's just being around people who can teach, and then my own teachers from, I started Billy Taylor, Harold Danko, lesser known genius named Hale Smith. They really spent a lot of time with me and tried to present the material in a way that I could understand it. It wasn't just the way they understood it. And I think that might be, right? You're getting me to think about these things that I don't usually think about. So I think that might be it. I think a really good teacher presents the material in a way that's kind of from the student's point of view, at least as a beginning, and then can enlarge in that point of view. It's not necessarily, oh, this is how I think about it, do this.
It's learning how to be a teacher as much as learning how to be a piano player, and your path of discovery. You explained it so well. Let's talk about Billy Taylor, because you hold him in such high regard. Every time you mention him, there's a big smile comes up on your face. Discuss your relationship with Billy Taylor and what he did for you as a teacher.
Okay, well, after my freshman year at University of Connecticut, you have the summers off, and I saw some ad for this program called Jazz in July at the University of Massachusetts, and Billy Taylor was the head of it. It was through his sort of inspired by his Jazzmobile teaching, I think, a lot of those same teachers, and Max Roach was there, and it's wonderful, wonderful musicians. And so I went for 2 weeks, and I went every summer for those 2 weeks in July for 4 years, and took classes. But I think he really just saw that I wanted to learn, and then we'd stay in touch through the year. He gave me his phone number. I didn't overuse it, but I could call him anytime, and he would just stay on the phone, or I'd go to concerts. He was such a nice guy. I remember one time I called him up. I said, "Oh, I see you're playing at Woolsey Hall at Yale, New Haven, next week. I'm going to come, bring some of my friends, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. We're going to come and see you." He goes, "Okay, well, go to the reception afterwards. Make sure you go to the reception. I have something for you." And so the first half of the concert was the Billy Taylor Trio, and then there was a long oratorio called "A Child of Our Time" by Michael Tippett, I think, British composer, which was very long, over an hour. That was the second half. And then I go to the reception, and this legend, this musical legend, sees me, comes over, says hi to all my friends, and then takes these two homemade cassette tapes out of his pocket and said, "These are out of print Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn records that I made cassettes for you. I still have them." And he wrote down all the tracks and everything, and he just hands it to me. And then this is the clincher. He says, "I'd like to stay and talk more, but I have to go because I have an early flight in the morning, and I stayed just to give you these." I mean, unbelievable, But I was reading his book again, which Jazz Piano History, which I hadn't read in decades, and I was reading it, and he tells a lot of good stories. And there's a story he tells that really warms my heart, and I think it's why he took some interest in me, because I wasn't the most advanced student at that workshop or anything, not by a long shot. So he tells this story that when he was a teenager, he was living in Washington, D.C., and Fats Waller was coming to town, the legendary jazz pianist. And at that time, you could just go backstage, and talk to these people, right? So Billy had some question he wanted to ask Fats Waller, some musical question about stride piano or something. And so he saw the concert, and he goes backstage, and when he's ready with the question, and when Fats starts walking towards him with his friends or manager or whatever, Billy froze. He froze up, couldn't say anything, and Fats just walked right by, didn't even look at him. And Billy Taylor said at that point that he made a vow that he would never let an opportunity like that go. He would ask questions, and he also relates stories. He would ask Art Tatum, "Can you show me this?" Thelonious Monk and he were friends. "Can you show me that?" He asked a million questions, and these other musicians took him under their wing. And I think in retrospect, he saw a little of me, himself in me. He saw a little of himself in me, and that I would ask just dozens of questions. I'd stay after class. "Oh, I'm working out the chords to Misty. What do you think of this chord substitution? I don't know what to do here. How do you think about this?" And we would walk across campus, like to the cafeteria for lunch, and I just ask these questions, and he never got tired of answering them. It was astonishing. Very, very nice man. Very warm, nice, encouraging person.
Well, maybe
a lot to him.
I can see how that inspired you to be who you are today, and who knows, maybe there'll be a young student of yours carrying on the traditions of teaching too in the future. That's what we all hope for, right?
Exactly.
It's funny. One of the worst things you can do, I used to teach journalism students about how to do interviews, is to write down a list of questions and then read the questions off of your list. It's like you're interviewing somebody, and he's a politician, and you say, "Well, what do you think of the weather today?" And he says, "Well, I'm thinking of launching a nuclear war against our opponents." And you read down your list of questions. "And what do you think of the economy?" And you're missing the bombshell, right? So I have my list of questions that I wrote up ahead of time. So now I'm going to look and see, because I've
they're like licks, questions are like licks, predetermined.
They really are. You don't have to use them all just because you know them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. What are some of the best experiences you've had as a teacher? Something you just remember is like, this student, the light bulb went off, or maybe it's a group thing. I don't know. What's the most rewarding moment?
I think, there's a general one in that for everybody, there's some when I'll first start working with somebody, it's kind of like some sort of detox, and not in a sort of a heavy way or anything, but just to lighten up and experience the fun of just improvising simple things in whatever style, whether it's rock or blues or jazz or whatever, classical, counterpoint students, but to try to get them to see that they can have a satisfying and good sounding musical experience without complexity. Because people think at first that they need to learn fancier left hand techniques or these different voicings or how to solo, with certain scales in order to sound good. You don't. You can sound really good with just a C chord and a C major scale at a ballad tempo. Once they really embrace that, whether it's after 30 minutes or 3 months or whatever it is, there's a huge shift where we can then start going deeper into some of these complexities. But it's the icing on the cake. It's not the cake itself, right? So they're not relying on it. We're not relying on using huge words in order to have a conversation. But if we wanted to use a word, if I knew any huge words, I could use it. And, that would just be otherwise serendipitous, right? But we're not relying on it, right? So anything we use grammatically that's in addition to our regular conversation is just extra. And it's the same thing with music. So that's something that happens with everybody. It's a general thing. There is one specific example, though. I was teaching this 14-year-old student. It's when I used to teach at a local school, and I'd go to some of their houses, teaching a lot of young kids and teens. And he had been only playing for about 2 years at this point. And he had made a remarkable progress playing Beethoven sonatinas and this and that, and had really picked it up well. And he had some learning challenges that he eventually overcame and went to college and everything. But he was being homeschooled, and he played classical great. And I got a sense that he could improvise. There's so much music in this kid. So I'd say, let's make up a melody. How do you do that? Just bored, What do you mean? I'd say, well, you just make up a melody. Can you do that? He would just play like, oh, don't know how to do that. Don't want to do it. So I didn't push it, right? You don't want to get all that resistance. So he loved piano. I didn't want to ruin it for him, right? So the next week I would just kind of, okay, we played our Beethoven. Let's just play one note. What do you mean? Well, how about this note? Well, just play another one. Pick a note. So we played a few notes, and he'd say, doesn't have any meaning. He'd actually say that. Doesn't have any meaning. Doesn't mean anything to me. No. So I didn't push it, but every once in a while I'd come back to this, like play a note or imitate me or a little conversation. And then after about, 5-6 weeks of this, I get to his door, and his mother opens, and tears are streaming down her face, just tears of joy. I said, what happened? She goes, my son sat down at the piano and improvised for hours and hours. It was something like, 7 hours or something. It was crazy. And she said, and he sounded like Beethoven. And from that day on, he kept improvising, hours a day. It was unbelievable. Sort of in a semi-classical pop style, and we did some blues. Unbelievable. It was so gratifying for me to help bring that out, but even more to see that potential in him come out for himself, which we all have.
I'm wondering if you have some sort of spiritual underpinning in your life, if you have studied Buddhism or have a guru in India or something like that, because I can almost hear Guru Ram saying, and you shall not say, I'm sorry anymore, you must say whoopsie. You've got these like pearls of wisdom scattered in your personal life, but also in your book right now. That whole idea of just stop saying I'm sorry, just say whoopsie, whatever is there's a spiritual underpinning that you can apply to every walk of life in your philosophy of teaching.
Yeah, I think it's just self-growth as a person and being interested in that. And yeah, well, first of all, I've played piano and keyboards in so many religious services, from churches to synagogues. I've probably heard more sermons than anybody, and then reading on my own and this and that. I think there's an underpinning that's there, sort of an underlying sense that we all have this baggage that's clouding over that light that's shining in us, and how can we bring that out? And I think that's probably even more important than learning a second inversion C chord for your musical happiness.
let's talk about apologizing for playing something wrong. I mean, to me, that's just so profound.
Yeah, yeah. People apologize when they play a wrong note. It's like, okay, here we go. Oops, sorry. Oops, sorry. I mean, I remember as a kid, I would like apologize when no one's around. A teenager. I didn't take piano really seriously till I was about 15, so I don't have many early experiences at the piano. I kind of played a little, but other instruments. But I would apologize to myself, and it's in our culture. Now they say my bad, So I've never heard anybody say that on piano yet, but they do say sorry all the time. And I think in a way it's this false sense of perfection. First of all, a piece of music can be perfect with wrong notes. We have to get that out on the table right now. Brahms played wrong notes when he played his own pieces in public, and his students said, what do you think of it? He goes, I don't care. I think it was Hans von Bülow, the 19th century pianist and teacher, who encouraged his students, when you're playing a fast piece, to hit wrong notes on purpose so that it sounds hard. It lets everybody know how hard it is. It's like that rock guitarist or that saxophonist going for that high note and kind of getting it, right? It's exciting, right? Or a singer cracking on a high note. No singers want to crack their voice, but it sounds so exciting sometimes, right? So, Toscanini, who was a tyrant in rehearsals and with his orchestras, said something like, nobody ever went to jail for wrong notes. So what happened was this false sense, I call it the myth of musical perfection. What happened is, as overdubbing technology came in and people started making mistake-free recordings because they could punch in one note or just do it 1,000 times until they got it right? In the old recordings, they couldn't do that. They didn't have the money for the wax cylinders. Or, you're going to record it once or twice, and then that's it. And you hear mistakes on all these great records. It emulates the way people performed in live. So recordings up until the 50s emulated the wrong note-laden performances people. Herbie Hancock's talked about this, how it was different learning in the 50s than it was in the 80s and beyond. He heard his musical idols make mistakes. If you listen to the Miles Davis Quintet play the song Oleo on Live at the Plug Nickel, it breaks down. They didn't care because they had another chance in the next tune. Right? And actually, Wayne Shorter played an unbelievably solo on that. Miles couldn't keep going. Herbie rescues the melody. They sound lost. And amidst all this, Wayne Shorter comes in and plays one of the greatest solos ever played on Rhythm Changes. In a modern studio now, they would have stopped the take before then, and that solo wouldn't have been played. So Wayne Shorter made something out of that. Nowadays, the situation's reversed. People make recordings. No, they sing live and play live, trying to imitate false, perfect recordings.
Right.
It just gives us so much stress that we have to do this. I think this is one of the reasons why in the classical piano world it's not a stigma to use sheet music anymore. Which Beethoven preferred his students use sheet music. He said by the time you practice it so much to memorize it, it's rote already. You don't want that. So he encouraged students to use sheet music, and now that's coming back, and also improvisation's coming back to the classical world, because I think there's just too much pressure to play Liszt note perfectly in front of 3,000 people every night. It's crazy.
I think
Some people can do it.
Go on.
No, some people can do it more naturally than others, but to have that be the minimum standard to have a concert career is crazy. And now it's kind of gotten into the jazz and the pop world too, where people are playing very careful performances because they don't want to hit one wrong note, whereas Charlie Parker and Miles Davis played wrong notes all the time.
I think I heard you once say there's never been a Miles Davis recording where he played perfectly or didn't play at least one wrong note. And probably the same thing could be said for Thelonious Monk. If anything, Monk embraced the wrong note on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely.
The wrong note, which is, usually just some sort of adventure that gives you an idea of somewhere else you could go.
Exactly. We're putting so much pressure on ourselves. It's debilitating. It's paralyzing.
In a perfect world, what's the best thing that can come from releasing this book? In your imagination of like, I've released this book now, and this is what's going to happen.
I think we're at the beginning of a new renaissance in piano improvisation, and classical musicians are improvising, pop musicians are doing they used to be called unplugged performances. Now they're at home, sort of Instagram performances at their home piano, where they're not planning it out so much. They're not fixing those wrong notes. And I think this whole notion of just really playing what I would call, I mean, produced music is real music, but it's one part of real music. And now the definition of what a musical performance can be is going back to the way it probably was before recordings. It's, hey, let's just take out a guitar and a piano and we'll sing, and someone will jam on the violin and we'll see what happens. And that's coming back. And piano improvisation is undergoing a real renaissance in every possible way, mixing genres, coming into, you watch hip-hop performances at the Super Bowl, and there's a little piano improv going on, in the halftime show. It was astonishing to see that in mainstream media. I would love my book to support that and to help people give themselves permission to just try things and to change their own approach through these ideas and through practicing and practicing the ideas, not necessarily drills, and transforming their approach to music so that they play with more joy. That's what I would hope. If people can play with more joy, whether it's in a week or over 10 years, that's going to change the world, I think, in the musical world, and maybe other parts of the world too.
That's beautiful. Do you have a message for your 14,000 subscribers about this new book that's coming out? Anything you want to tell them? Almost like a teaser for a big blockbuster movie coming out. What would you tell your subscribers about this new book they haven't heard about yet?
Well, that's a good question. Because I think what I'd like to tell people is that they can do it. They can realize their musical dreams, and I hope this book helps them do that.
Is there a question you wish I could have answered or asked you? Is there something I should be asking you that's like, I hope Peter asks me this?
No, I went into this just like an improvisation. It's a blank slate. I have no expectations other than to have a good time and to talk about improvisation with you. I think we've covered a lot.
I guess because I'm a teacher, I'm really interested in your teaching. And, I'm a musician too. We have so much in common. But, and sometimes it's good to ask a similar question from just another angle and get another take. Do you see, there's a real natural flow in your writing, right? Do you see a connection between performing and writing? Some playing your piano and playing your computer keyboard, and putting words down. I guess the word is flow, because right now I see you discovering your writer's voice. That's just me, the English teacher, the writing coach. Something clicked and it's flowing now. So I'll rephrase that as a question. Are you discovering a natural flow to your writing, and do you see a similarity between that and your piano playing?
Yes, and even the word flow, right? Things can flow. One word, one note can flow into the next. A process can flow, right? I have an idea, and how's it going to manifest? Where is it going to go? And it's almost like you take a bucket of water and stand at the top of a little hill of sand, like in a sandbox, and you just dump a little water down. You've done that, but then it takes on a life of its own. You don't know where it's going to go naturally. And I think music's like that, and writing as well, and composing music and improvising music and playing other people's music. The word flow doesn't always mean flow fast, right? It means flow in a way that takes the listener and ourselves on a journey, tells a story. So, for instance, a lot of people think that the initial idea is all important. Beethoven's a genius because he did this. Well, what if he did this? Genius. Oh, even more genius. Okay, see where this is going. Oh, it doesn't seem like genius anymore, does it? could go on. How long is your interview for, right? So it's not the initial idea. It's when does it need to change a little? When is it losing energy? Right? So Beethoven knew that he could get away with one of those, he could get away with a second, but then he's got to go faster. So it's the same thing with anything else. You're playing a blues, you have an idea. You know, where is it going to go next, right? Does it change? Does it repeat? It's the same thing with writing, I think. And this is where I think a lot of composers could focus their attention even a little more. Is when does it need something a little different? When's that one little spot where, okay, it's good, but Hansel and Gretel have to go into the woods. And then they can't just, get lost and have a picnic and come home. Got to meet the witch, right? And then something's got to happen, right? So each time something's happening. So there's modulation, or there's motivic development, or reiterating a thought in writing, or starting a new paragraph, or bringing in a contrasting idea, or shifting the perspective from my experience to the reader's experience. All these things have analogies in music.
Finding conflict and then resolving it. Tension,
exactly.
Peace, right?
Exactly.
You talked about what you would hope that your readers get from your book, and a sense of joy. Are you still, after all these years, feeling joy when you play the piano? What brings you joy, Ron?
What brings me joy when I'm playing piano is discovering the flow of the music and today, not yesterday. I'm not trying to climb yesterday's mountain again, or thinking too much about, I'm not practicing for the future anymore. I'm practicing to actually play today. It's about, for me, it's about connecting with my ear, with whatever's happening inside me, whatever wisp of an idea is floating around. It's connecting with that and developing that in a live way and letting it develop. That's what brings me the most joy as a musician. And it feels the same to me as when I was playing with a rock band when I was 15, just enjoying every moment of it. And when I was 15, I made this decision. I've given myself 15 years to become a top flight professional musician. So by the time I'm 30, 15 to 30, okay, 15 years, few years to learn my craft, get established. And yeah, by the time I was 30, I'd helped develop a Broadway show, Swinging on a Star. We got nominated for a Tony Award. 1993 to 5, we were developing that. I was the associate musical director. I did arrangements. I had played at Carnegie Hall, Blue Note, with top jazz musicians. I've done choir arrangements and published some of my own music. I'd done most of those things that I had set out to do. And I remember I was playing with the New York Pops Orchestra at a benefit at Carnegie Hall. It was an annual benefit we did for a Leukemia Foundation. So I was in my early 30s. And one year, the first year I went, it was like being in my living room. I'm on stage and there's 70 musicians around me. I'm accompanying some great famous singers and everything. And I looked out at the audience and it's like, you're in my living room. It felt great. The next year, same thing. And I'm feeling tense. I'm like, what's going on here? This is supposed to be fun, right? And I looked around, even at the rehearsal I was feeling tense. I looked around and out of those 70 musicians, some of them were having the times of their lives and others just looked burnt out. They looked, okay, it's a tough life, being a musician. And I thought, what's the difference? It's all in here. It was the same venue, same musicians, basically, same type of audience, similar music. I'm doing my own arrangements, right? A couple of my own arrangements, and I'm feeling tense. Why is that? So I think the process, getting interested in the process, is what interests me now. It's not necessarily always the result. The results will take care of themselves more often than not, or at least being interested in the process gives the music a chance to be really good more often than not. If I'm ironically, if I'm focused on getting it perfect and I got to play my best, got to play my best, that stifles the chance of doing that. It's like a baseball player, got to hit a home run, got to hit a home run. Occasionally that works, but it usually means I'm looking at the fence and I take my eye off the ball and I miss it, right? So you get your good form, keep your eye on the ball, hit the ball. Sometimes it's going to go out of the park.